Woots yeet, me wazards. It's Dev from the place down there. We like it of magic, you know all that by now. And you also know that we got some more of the Spark spoilers for you. That's what you come for. That's what we've been doing. It's my life now. So Friday we got to see a bunch more spoilers actually. It wasn't a light day like we've been getting most of the week. We got a few cards today, and some of them are like right in here, and some of them are like kind of in here, and then like 4 cards specifically are like way up here where you can't even see my hand. So let's go ahead and look at a couple of individual slices before we get to the cards that are like the whole greasy pizza. Alright, well to start the day off, let's look at Toll of the Invasion. This is 3 mana, 2 mana black for sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a non-laid card from it, that player discards that card, and then you amass 1. Well, there's a reason I looked at this card first. It's not particularly exciting, although a 3 mana 1/1 that coerces them when it enters the battlefield is actually not the worst play ever. Especially, I could see this being pretty decent in like sealed, limited. You get rid of their big bomb, and you advance your board state. Usually cards like this don't advance the board state whatsoever, which is one thing I do really like about it, but in Turbo Davriel decks in Standard, where you're just trying to run them out of cards as quickly as possible and land a Dav, then you're probably going to want to play like a Mind Rot effect. You know, if something like Arterial Flow or even Heartless Pillage might be better than this in the Standard decks that might want an effect like this. And even if you did want an effect like this in Standard that wasn't a Mind Rot effect for your Davriel deck, you might actually pick a card like Never Happened instead of this. The body is relevant, but probably not relevant enough to carry the card. Now let's check out Centaur Nurture next. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 2/4 Centaur Druid, and when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. You can also tap it to just add a mana of any color, so this is a sweet utility creature at the common level for the limited environment, which is where I really like this. 4 toughness is not bad at all in that environment, and a 4 mana 2/4 aren't the best stats, but they're at least kind of baseline stats. Aside from that, you get to catch up against the aggro decks you're playing against, and you just get to ramp too and fix your mana in a limited environment that's probably going to require some mana fixing. So I like a lot about this card in that environment. Obviously don't think it really makes the jump to any other formats, but it's going to be a bread and butter card in limited. We've seen a bunch of really decent limited stuff. Like most cards I don't think will make it to constructed still look pretty decent in limited, so it looks like we're shaping up to have a nice limited environment. This card's going to be a part of it. Well, up next, let's look at Bond of Discipline. This is 5 mana, 4 and a white for a sorcery. Tap all creatures your opponents control, and creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So yeah, that's probably very good. In limited again. I'm not sure that an effect this expensive makes the jump to standard, although this will break stalemates in pretty much any format. This protects you from the crackback even if you attack with everything, which is really, really nice. And you're looking to attack with everything because you just tapped your opponent's entire board. So again, in limited, this is going to win many a game, break a bunch of stalemates. It's super splashable, and especially in sealed, this actually isn't super overcosted, especially for an effect that if it doesn't win you the game outright, it will probably eventually win you the game, because you're going to get in a buttload of damage all at one time, and again, be somewhat protected from crackback if your opponent decides to swing away too. Now, in a similar vein, we also saw Pledge of Unity today. This is only 3 mana, 1, a green, and a white for an instant. Instant speed is important. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. You gain 1 life for each creature you control. So this also looks pretty decent in sealed or in limited at large, period. You know, a +1/+1 counter on all your guys at instant speed can be used as a combat trick to protect all your dudes, you know, when you're getting swung in on. But obviously, you can use this card for offensive purposes as well, and gaining a life for each creature you control is going to catch you back up, again, against aggro type decks. But I think this is mostly a limited card, especially considering we have Unbreakable Formation at the 3 CMC slot in decks that would want a card like this. But I will admit, this also works really well with any proliferate stuff. That's going to be especially important in limited to give your whole team, you know, future proliferate bonuses, we'll call them. And if you can build the deck around it in standard, then yeah, proliferating your whole team after you cast this card multiple times actually seems pretty good. You know, setting your whole team up for 2 or 3 proliferate triggers after you cast this actually seems good, but I'm not sure that it's quite good enough, especially again considering we have Unbreakable Formation. It just seems like a better card on most levels. But speaking of proliferate, we also saw Contentious Plan today. This is 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Proliferate and draw a card. That's good, right? I mean, I wish it was instant speed, but that would probably be nigh broken were it instant speed. There's a lot of crazy stuff you could pull off. Just in the limited environment, I would imagine if this was instant speed, and a couple of your guys had +1/+1 counters, but that's kind of neither here nor there. I just like that they printed this card. I'm not sure that it really does anything in Standard, although decks that are looking to proliferate in, you know, for cheeky reasons will probably seek to play this card, but I'm not sure that there's not, you know, 60 other cards that are better than this one way or the other, if you're looking to make the proliferate deck, you know? So I'm not sure this actually does much, but it does look really good on its face, and I might be undervaluing it too. Just 2 mana to put loyalty on all your planeswalkers, put extra counters on any, you know, explore creatures or otherwise big creatures that have counters on them. Actually, it doesn't seem bad. You get to draw the card too, so it replaces itself, you know. 2 mana for this effect can be easily made worth it, but is it going to be worth the slot in your deck? Again, the rate is pretty easy to make it worth it. It's almost there by itself, although you do have to have a lot of support for the card in your deck, and that's where I start wondering if there's not just better things you could be doing in your proliferate deck, but we'll see. I think this is a perfect rate for this. I have a similar problem with Bond of Flourishing. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them and put it into your hand, but the rest on the bottom of your library in any order, you gain 3 life. Now, this is also a lot of juice for just 2 mana, but the sorcery speed hurts it a little bit. That said, how much does the sorcery speed hurt it, you know? 2 mana to gain 3 life this early in the game is kind of like a... Let me put it this way. It's like a better, quote-unquote, better version of Revitalize. Now, Revitalize is instant speed. That helps that card out an awful lot, but at sorcery speed, you still get the card selection, you know? Instead of just drawing a card, you're nearly guaranteed to get a card from the top 3, even if it's just a land. You're nearly guaranteed to do so, and you gain the 3 life just like Revitalize, so this could be used as sort of an early game, you know, sideways fog effect. In the Nexus decks, I could definitely see that happening, but I'm not really sure outside of lands what permanents you're trying to get, like Search for Azcanta in that deck, Wilderness Reclamation, and it is good that this just says permanents, you know, it's not creature or land, or just planeswalker creature or anything like that. The spread of options is really, really nice on this card, and if anything carries it into playability, I think that'll be it. You know, the ability to get artifacts, or enchantments, or planeswalkers, creatures, or even a basic land. All of that is really nice. You're almost guaranteed to find action with this card if you built your deck properly. And all that said, though, I'm just not sure that it's better than, like, Adventurous Impulse. But if you're looking for, again, enchantments, like specifically like Azcanta or Wilderness Reclamation, this card is definitely worth the inclusion in the decks that might want it. Because, again, it's just kind of an early game fog effect for most intents. I didn't mean to sound like I'm not impressed at all by that card. I think of the 2 mana sorcery speed cards we just covered, that one definitely has a better chance. It's got a lot of versatility on it. I do like the card, but up next is Firemind Vessel, which I actually like less, so I've kind of misordered this, but anyway. It's just 4 mana for an artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped, which is dumb, and you tap it to add 2 mana of different colors. Now, if this didn't enter the battlefield tapped, it would effectively just cost 2 mana and probably be good, but not necessarily broken, you know? As it is, though, I don't think that this ends up really seeing Commander play. 4 mana is a lot, especially considering it does enter tapped. You have to wait for the next turn. I just don't know that this is at that power level. And that said, I also don't know that it's at the power level of Standard, obviously, you know. There are reasons why we might want a card like this, but for those reasons, I think a card like, say, Chromatic Lantern is just better, you know. So I'm not sure that this sees the play that it's supposed to see. Like it's designed for a specific thing. We'll talk about that towards the end of the video. But as it is, I think this is an interesting card, but probably not quite there. But the last card I want to look at before I start showing my pretty face to you is Jace's Triumph. This is 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Draw 2 cards. If you control a Jace Planeswalker, draw 3 instead. Now this is noteworthy just because it's a strictly better divination, which is not a bad card. Actually, funny enough, I did a Twitter poll not long ago, and the question was, is divination good? Basically. And actually the yeses won that one. I think they were just slightly in the majority in that poll, if I remember correctly. Because Divination has been celebrated as a decent card in the past, especially if we're talking about the limited environment. It's great in sealed, helps you get your 4th land, helps you draw into your bomb. It's 3 mana card advantage. And sometimes it does carry over into Standard. We've seen people play Divination as a sorcery speed card. For decks that need sorcery specifically, like the Mirari Conjecture, it's not uncommon to see a one-of divination in that deck if it's playing 2 or more colors. Otherwise, it'll just play like Secrets of the Golden City. But for the most part, 2 and 3 color versions of the Mirari Conjecture decks will play a divination or 2 even as a sorcery speed effect they can pull out of their graveyard with Mirari Conjecture. So this probably takes the slot over that, if nothing else. But if you do happen to have a Jace, 3 mana for 3 cards is an absolutely unbelievable rate. It's really good. It's no Ancestral Recall or anything. But it's still a great rate in Standard Magic. Drawing 3, 4/3, even at sorcery speed, is a pretty decent effect. You just get like risk factor when they let you draw the cards, you know? And in decks that just want to refill their hand, that'll be really good gas once you have your Jace on the battlefield, but it's going to be a relatively tough condition to actually fulfill. I will say though, just 3 mana for 2 cards has proven to be good enough at very specific times and in very specific decks. And if a deck does want a divination effect, this is just the de facto option in Standard, I think. But let's get into real, quote-unquote, real cards. You know, those were sort of the intermediate level stuff. But late last night, actually right as I started rendering yesterday's video, God Eternal Ronis popped up. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 5/5 legendary zombie god with Death Touch. And when Rhonas enters the battlefield, double the power of each other creature you control until end of turn. Those creatures also gain vigilance until end of turn. And it's got the god ability here. When it dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, they put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. This card seems very pushed to me, but that's a fairly contentious opinion depending on who you talk to. Actually made a Twitter post last night about like how frustrating it is, kind of. Really, I said that I had to laugh at them, but it's simultaneously frustrating to look at Spike's evaluate cards sometimes. The competitive Magic subreddit, there's a lot of people on that subreddit trashing this card, and even people on the main Magic Reddit, and I understand why they're making the evaluations that they're making, you know, especially if you are playing against control. The card is fairly bad. It's not likely to resolve, and usually you're going to be resolving it onto a empty board anyway, because they will have Kaya's Wrath you, or some other similar sweeper, and it can be thought erasured out of your hand or something, but that again is mostly for concern against control. But in pretty much every other matchup in the format, whether it's, you know, small aggro decks or even in the mid-range mirrors, this card has this huge edge. It's kind of a Crater Hoof Behemoth that doesn't grant trample, grants vigilance. That's kind of cool. Protects you again from swingy crackbacks in mirror matches, you know. Vigilance is actually kind of a big deal. It kind of assumes that your opponent will survive until the next turn. I'd much rather have trample like Behemoth provides, but this costs way less than Behemoth and put your opponent in a weird spot, you know. If they do remove it, which they very likely want to, then you're going to get it back in a turn or 2 or 3, and at that point you get the ETB trigger again, and you've had a couple of turns to build your board in anticipation of that. So I like that a lot. It goes really well with Vivian's Arcbow, as all the gods do, but this is on color with Arcbow. Even if they do kill your Rhonas, if you have an Arcbow out, it's kind of a damned if they do, damned if they don't situation. They don't want to kill your Rhonas, but they kind of have to. But if they do, you get that ETB trigger again. And even though, again, it doesn't provide trample, there are a bunch of creatures below it on the curve that have trample. You know, it's not too hard to envision Gruul Spellbreaker on turn 3, even just Pelt Collector on turn 1. If it survives until you drop Rhonas, should have trample by then. And there's plenty of other trample options below this on the curve. Plus even things like Rekindling Phoenix, you know, an evasive creature, increase its power to 8 and fly over, you know, on curve even. All of that seems just absolutely bonkers to me. The card has built-in resilience, repeatable enter the battlefield trigger, and honestly, to me, just on its face, a card with, you can say this about Bantu as well, but I think this is a little bit easier to get the value off of. Because you don't have to like sacrifice, you don't have to 2 or 3 for 1 yourself like you did with Bantu. An enter the battlefield trigger on a recursive creature is really, really dangerous, especially when it has decent stats. And just like the last Rhonas, the Death Touch doesn't matter that much, but the edge situations where the Death Touch does matter, you'll be really happy, and you will no longer refer to this as just a dumb keyword ability, because Niv Mizzet will block it, and then suddenly the Death Touch matters an awful lot. So I actually really like this card an awful lot, and I think it's a slam dunk too of at least in mono green. This is a great, great curve topper for a mono green deck. It doesn't even have to be a curve topper. You can Carney T after this if you absolutely want it. But again, if you're just looking for a relatively low to the ground green deck that plays a 5-drop, you could probably work 2 of these in, and suddenly Steel Leaf Champion looks an awful lot better. So I do like this card a good bit, and I think it's better than a lot of competitive players are evaluating it. I think this card has a good chance simply because I can't even talk today. I'm excited about this card and I want to defend it. But simply because an Enter the Battlefield trigger combined with resiliency on a pretty decently statted body for the cost, that's all 3 really, really good things, even if you don't have anything to work necessarily along with it. But we have plenty of things up under the curve to work with this card, and I think it's going to be a force. Now up next, another God Eternal. This is God Eternal Kefnet, 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for 4/5 legendary zombie god with flying. That creature type will never get old. You may reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it. Whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card this way, copy that card. You may cast that copy. That copy costs 2 less to cast. When God Eternal Calfnet dies or is put into the exile from the battlefield, you know what to do with it. You put it 3rd from the top. The bird is once again the word. This is better than the last Kefnet, and I like the last Kefnet. There are issues I have with this card. This is one where I think that some of the more well thought out spike posts have actually got it right as far as this card's functionality in control decks. I'm not entirely certain that this sorcery speed thing that does turn on your opponent's removal, even though it does come back, it turns on removal against your opponent's deck. And it forces you to use mana at inopportune times during your draw step and stuff. So there are definitely some points against this card. But at the same time, I kind of can't think of any better control finisher that you might want to play at the moment. Like, I think this is probably better if you're going to play creature at all, which most control decks don't. And I think that's the biggest strike against this card. You just do what we've been doing, Teferi them out, But if you do want to play creatures, then you can compare this to Nezahal or Dream Eater, and this is probably the better card, even at sorcery speed, because of how much advantage you can actually get out of this card before it's all said and done. Note the cool tricks with this. It effectively allows you to cast sorceries at technically instant speed, like during your draw step, for instance, but also note that the wording on the card allows you to do this on your opponent's turn. So long as it's the first card that you've drawn. So if you cast Opt, Chemister's Insight, any number of cards really that just say draw a card at instant speed, then you'll do this on your opponent's turn, and suddenly you can cast, removal at a discount, which is just insane. You can even technically, by the way, say your opponent declares their attack step or they swing in at you. You could play an Opt and then try to get a Kaya's Wrath. If you do get that Kaya's Wrath off the top, like a miracle, then suddenly you can cast it at instant speed. Yeah, you don't really get a discount on it, but you can cast it at instant speed in specifically this situation. So there are some really neat workarounds with this card that I do like in specifically a control deck, but I think that it works a little bit better in sort of a tap-out variant, something like a Grixis, or just a dedicated blue-black control. Imagine how this works when it rips and Enter the God Eternals off the top of the library. Suddenly, you effectively get 2 copies of Enter the God Eternals. Somebody asked on Twitter, what happens to the card? The card that you're drawing and getting a copy of, it just goes into your hand. You just draw it. You just draw the card. So you've effectively gotten 2 copies of any instant or sorcery that you might actually copy and then cast with this. So you effectively get 2 copies of Enter the God Eternals, and one of them for only 3 mana. The copy at just 3 mana, and you'd have a backup copy sitting in your hand because you just drew it. So the card is nuts. It works that way with a bunch of other removal. 1 mana cast downs that you effectively double up on and stuff. Vraska's Contempt for 2 mana, and you still get to keep a Vraska's Contempt in your hand. It's all so insane to me, and it might work in control decks, but again, I think this could work much better in these tap-out control style decks that aren't as concerned with countering spells, which this doesn't necessarily work very well with, So I do like a lot of things about the card. It will have to prove itself, but I think it's just got so much going for it that, just like Rhonas, this is probably bound to be a force in the format, if only for the fact that it just gets you so much eventual value, and it's not too hard to keep on the battlefield in the first place. But up next, it was really difficult to order the final 2 cards of the day because I'm excited about both of them, like really excited. But I think I'm going to do Finale of Promise first, even though I think this is probably the better card out of the final 2. This is 2 red and X for sorcery. You may cast up to 1 target instant card and or up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard, each with converted mana cost X or less, without paying their mana cost. If a card cast this way would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. But if X is 10 or more, copy each of those spells twice. You may choose new targets for the copies. Okay, so the first thing I thought, obviously, was like Teferi plus Wilderness Reclamation plus this, because you're able to cast it at instant speed with Teferi. You have to untap a bunch of land, so it's not too hard to get to X equals 10. But honestly, that is probably one of the worst applications with the card, is this like Christmas land stuff. How do I get to X plus equals 10? And yeah, it's a possibility in this format. We have plenty of ways of making big mana if that's what you want to do, and I could definitely see a deck trying to do that. But honestly, I'm a lot more excited about just like X equals 1. X equals 1 just in standard can get you some stuff, but in modern, dog. Like in modern, X equals 1 can get you Lightning Bolt and Faithless Looting, which is probably good enough for just like 3 mana. And in just modern burn, X equals 1 can get you like Lightning Bolt and Lava Spike to finish the game off. This just seems like a fairly cheap, good way of finishing games in the modern format. I'm jacked about this in Eternal formats, even things like Legacy, where you get like Chain Lightning. That looks pretty good, So, and note too, in modern, another reason to be excited is that this is yet another thing. Like Wizards just keeps giving us stuff that allows us to cast free spells out of our graveyard or whatever, out of our hand, whatever, just for nothing. This is another workaround for Ancestral Vision, for instance. You can just cast X equals 0, you cast Ancestral Vision out of your graveyard, and it's absolutely nuts. You get at least 1 spell worth of value, which is sometimes worth your 2 mana to recast an Ancestral Vision, but the situations where we're able to get an instant and a sorcery at a relatively low cost out of this card are just absolutely busted and could actually make a real impact on Eternal formats. But again, even in Standard, you can do relatively silly stuff. X equals 5, or X equals 3, excuse me, so 5 total mana for the card. Doesn't seem too hard to hit in Standard, and at that point, you can get like Wizard's Lightning and Skewer the Critics and finish the game off that way too. So it sort of scales to the format, There's just so much I like about the card. It is not hard to fill your graveyard. Obviously in Modern with stuff like Thought Scour, which you then get to recast in these Delver decks or whatever you're trying to do. But in Standard, it's pretty easy to fill your graveyard too. If you've ever played like Art like Phoenix decks, or even just like Drakes, period. You fill your graveyard really fast to flip Ascanthus and to, adapt Terramanders and whatnot. So this card it's pretty easy to break this thing, especially in Arc like Phoenix decks, where now we got to start worrying about playing like Crash Through or Warlord's Fury, obviously these like 1 mana sorceries that allow us to get the most value out of this, because in Arc like Phoenix, if you can get both an instant and a sorcery off of this for just the 3 mana ideally, then that's 3 spells. Because this is casting them out of your graveyard. So you'll not only get, this spell resolved, but an instant and a sorcery, and immediately your Arclight Phoenixes can come back. And that's pretty dope too. So if that's the only standard application this card has, it's going to make Arclight Phoenix a lot better just day 1. So this card looks absolutely gross to me. And there's probably even more applications outside of the relatively limited stuff I've named in this video so far. But the final card of the day so far, at least, is Niv Mizzet. The Miz Reborn. This is 5 mana, all 5 colors of mana, in fact, for a 6/6 Legendary Dragon Avatar. That is a sweet creature type with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, reveal the top 10 cards of your library. For each color pair, choose a card that's exactly those colors from among them. Put the chosen cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, that is so good. The battlefield trigger. Obviously, this requires building your entire deck around the card. And the card does have to resolve, which kind of sucks. This is another thing that you could, if you wanted to be a party pooper, you could probably, honestly say that against control, this is just going to get countered, and who cares, and you're bad at Magic, and blah, blah, blah. But still. sometimes I like to analyze the best case scenario. I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to average, try to look at the average scenario for a card like this. If you can resolve it, it's possible that you get a 3-for-1 off of this. We're seeing a few of those in the set. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a great many 2 and 3-for-1s in this set between a few of the cards that we've seen. This is just another one. You actually get this to resolve, and if you build your deck properly and you get a little bit of luck, then it's possible that you'll get like 5 cards out of this. It could happen. Especially in formats like Modern, where you've got access to like both Boros Charm and all of those like old school and Return to Ravnica charms and stuff. That's good. But also, you've got like Dragon Charms, things like Kolagon's Command, Dramoka's Command, like all that looks very good too in conjunction with this card. But even in Standard, we obviously just had 2 whole sets devoted to, all 10 guilds. Plus, there's a little bit of guild work in this set too, so it's not too hard to envision a world, especially, like if it's like a Hero Precinct 1 deck or something like that, it's not too hard to imagine this coming down and not only being a flying finisher, but also having the ability to just draw you like at least 3 cards worth of gas for Hero Precinct 1 to then start making more tokens off of. Even if they kill Niv Mizzet, it just refuels you way too much, So this is a tough card to really evaluate because it does cost all 5 colors of mana. That's a lot harder than it looks. But we do have, different ways of producing mana in this format. We've got a couple of different, rocks that produce all the mana. I've already brought up Chromatic Lantern in this video, which is something you probably want to look at if you want to play this deck. But you can also just reanimate this. It's an Enter the Battlefield trigger, so it's not too hard to just reanimate it. That's one way to go. But there's other stuff, we're in a format with all the duels in the world, shocks, checks, even guild gates if you need them. So I can imagine it's not actually as hard to cast this card as it looks to me at first glance. And again, you build your deck the right way, and suddenly this provides at least 3 cards for you. If not more, if you get really lucky, this provides you just oodles. I don't think I've ever said oodles on the channel. Just a crazy macaroni and just a big bowl of macaroni and cheese worth of... am I hungry? I actually haven't eaten today. Maybe that's why I keep using food analogies. But just a big old bowl of Captain Crunch worth of... These food analogies don't even make sense. But anyway, this could just give you 3, 4, possibly even 5 cards if we're in Christmas land upon entering the battlefield. And at that point, you don't actually care if your 6/6 flying gets removed. You probably won the game just with pure card advantage at that point anyway. But anyway, that's all I got to say about the cards today so far. I'll probably get back on here sometime during the weekend. As a matter of fact, got a weekend project coming up that I think y'all are all going to be really into. We'll see. But one way or the other, I will talk to y'all again this weekend at some point, whether it's to talk about the set or just to jabber on about, some other Magic stuff. We'll see. But I'll definitely show my face again this weekend, one thing or the other. But one way or the other. But aside from that, just let me know how you felt about all these. Let me know what I missed down there in the comments section. Did I get any interactions wrong? Or is there just some kind of gonzo combo that's going to take over Standard or Modern or Legacy or something that I just didn't bring up? So do all that down there in the comments section. Always interesting to hear from you. Like the video if you enjoyed the video. Sub if you're new. We're not done with spoiler season. And my official exclusive preview is going to be coming up on Monday for you. And all I can say is that's a pretty good card. That's it. That's all I can say. That's all I can say. That's literally it. So aside from that, just make sure you're subbed so you get that content as well. Check out the Patreon if you want to. Hello, all the new patrons this month. I really appreciate you signing up, even if it's just $1 all the way to $10. Thank you so much. Any new deck doctors, I'll get to you very, very soon here. All that. So just really appreciate all the new patrons this month. I'll make sure I give you enough value. One thing I will say, actually, before I get out of here, I have a little bit of extra time today, is that signed cards this month won't go out until the set comes out. I'm going to get a box of the set delivered to me the day it comes out. It'll be on my doorstep. And then the next day, I will send signed cards out. So it might be the first, second, third, something like that, before you get your signed cards for this month. Just keep that in mind. But it's because I want to send you stuff from More of the Spark. I think it's a good compromise. But in any case, if you're interested in being a patron, helping support the channel, that would really mean a lot to me. And anyone who has recently done so, thank you very, very much. I've gotten messages from a few old patrons that have just recently rejoined. You're awesome. Thanks for coming back. That means a lot to me too. So if you want to do that, do that. If you want to check out pre-orders on Patreon. If you could pre-order cards, I'm not Rudy. If you could pre-order cards through Patreon, that'd be something. But pre-order cards through TCG Player over here. They have the lowest prices on the internet, not only on the singles for pre-order, but also on sealed product. Can't say MSRP anymore. Somebody reminded me of that in the comments section the other day. They don't have stuff below MSRP because, according to Wizards, MSRP is a concept that doesn't exist and never, in fact, existed in the first place. So they have boxes for under $100, which is what you'd expect to pay, which is what MSRP is supposed to be, but in any case, check them out. First link in the description if you want to do that. It helps out my metrics when you do. But in any case, I'm pretty sure that's all I got for now, so I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.